Story 1. So, I started volunteering at a wildlife refuge recently, and one of the resident animals is awfully weird. Like I said, I started volunteering there about a month ago. I go in on Sundays and Saturdays for a 5-hour shift and basically just feed the animals, change their water, give medication to the ones who need it, and then do miscellaneous work. This is a wildlife refuge though, so the end goal is to return as many of the animals as we can that are delivered to us by animal control back to the wild. Unfortunately, some animals, for one reason or another, can't go back to the wild because of injuries, imprinting, or what have you. These are our resident animals, permanent stays at the refuge. On my first day, the lady who runs the place gave me a tour. It's not a big place, maybe the size of a small park, with maybe 2 or 3 dozen animals of all species and all sizes at any given time. She showed me where the raccoons are, where the possums are, where the squirrels are. There's even a one-eyed coyote there as a resident. But then at the end of the tour, she brought me towards a relatively large building. It was wooden, but about the size of 2 cargo containers side by side, with a pretty hefty padlock and some bolts on the entrance, and what looked like a reinforced beam and walls all around. Most of the buildings that housed the refuge animals were in mild disrepair, only as well maintained as they needed to be, but this one looked like someone was taking care of it and repairing it on a weekly basis, if not more frequently. The lady explained to me that this is where they kept the resident deer, Bambi. She had slipped the name, but then I remembered from reading the handbook that wildlife refuges aren't even supposed to have deer, let alone make them a resident, since they're so high maintenance and such a hassle to deal with. I asked her why we have Bambi then, and she explained, yes, well, Bambi's sort of a special case. It's a bit complicated as to why. All you need to know is that you don't have to feed her or anything. I do that myself, since she's a bit much to handle at times. Right as she finished her explanation, there was a loud bang from the enclosure that Bambi was housed in, which both looked and felt like it shook the foundations of the place. For a moment, I worried that the walls would collapse and an angry deer would come rushing out, but that thankfully didn't happen. Seems like she's energetic today. I might need some sedatives when I go in. It wasn't strange for the refuge to use sedatives. They were dealing with wild animals after all. But my mind was immediately struck with the image of this slightly tubby, middle-aged lady taking down a deer with a tranquilizer rifle, which I laughed about a little to myself. I put my concerns about this deer out of my mind, though, and just focused on getting trained for the job. Whenever I was near Bambi's building, though, I would sometimes hear what I would assume, based on my naive experience from watching too many nature shows, was a deer call. But it was deeper, almost a grumbling, much like a large predator animal would make. Plenty of the animals in the refuge made noises, some almost constantly, but the sounds Bambi was making were quite unsettling compared to what the other animals sounded like. Again, though, I tried not to worry about it, and my first few days working at the wildlife refuge went fine. Sunday before last, though, I saw something that started to make me a bit more concerned about what was going on with Bambi. The lady who ran the place had explicitly told me that she fed Bambi after we closed up shop around 6 p.m. because the deer were nocturnal and night eaters. I knew that nocturnal deer existed, so this wasn't too worrisome for me. What was worrisome was what I saw when I was sitting out in my car after my shift was over, texting a friend about my dinner plans. It looked like the manager was making her way over to feed Bambi, and she was carrying 2 things with her as she approached the enclosure. The first was a tranquilizer rifle, at which point I had a small nervous chuckle at my previous thought actually ending up being true. The second thing was a bag that looked deep red and full of liquid. What I saw in the bag was unmistakable. Even from that distance, it was a bag full of raw, bloody meat, enough to feed a group of 20 people at a steakhouse with 2 servings each, if not more. Now, I knew that some deer have been shown to eat meat under specific circumstances, so the concept of Bambi having some steak for dinner wasn't that concerning to me. Instead, it was the sheer amount of raw flesh that was being brought in by the manager, and the fact that it seemed to be the only food that she was bringing in. I know that deer can eat meat, but I'm fairly certain that there's no species of deer that eats only meat. They can be omnivorous, but God, I've never heard of a purely carnivorous deer. Worried that the manager might get mad if she knew I was watching, I ducked under the dashboard, waited for her to go in, and quickly drove off for dinner with my friends, putting the image of that bag full of raw meat out of my mind as I coincidentally enough had some hamburgers to eat. Now, that could have easily been the end of it, and I could have just minded my own business afterwards. But as any good nosleeper, my curiosity was too far gone to be suppressed by common sense. Between the noises that no deer should make, the regular shaking and crashing coming from inside Bambi's enclosure, and now knowing what the deer's daily dinner consisted of, I had to go look. I just had to. I had been entrusted with the keys to the animals' cages and enclosures on my second week, and I quickly realized that there was one key on the ring I didn't use for anything on my daily routine. I figured it must be to some place that wasn't being used, or maybe had been decommissioned, and I didn't overthink it at the time. This past Sunday, though, I had an idea, one that turned out to be right. I don't know why the manager would keep a key to Bambi's enclosure on the ring that all of her volunteers use, but I wasn't about to question her oversight. I made my way to the building once I was sure the manager would be busy for a while with some of her office work, and slowly and steadily approached the entrance. I was used to Bambi's banging up against the walls whenever anyone got close, but it still startled me every time it happened, now more than ever. More importantly, I hoped that all the noise the deer was making wasn't alerting the manager to what I was trying to do. Eventually, after what felt like minutes of tiptoeing to the door, I managed to reach the padlock, tried the key, and it went in on the first try, which somehow didn't come as a surprise to me. A few bolts later, and I managed to open the front door, which opened into an airlock of Bambi's enclosure. All of the other enclosures have a similar system to keep them from getting out whenever we go in to feed or clean them, so this wasn't surprising. What was surprising was just how secure the inner door of the airlock was. If the outer door felt like a bank vault, then the inner door felt like Fort Knox. There must have been 4 or 5 different locks, all of which used the same key, thankfully, and at least half a dozen different bolts. The door itself was heavily reinforced, and pushing on it, it felt like it must have weighed quite a bit. Of course, all of these precautions made sense given the strength of Bambi, which I regularly noticed shook the building, desperately trying to contain her. Right as I had that thought, another such bang came from just inside along the wall, thankfully not on the door, which felt far louder than it normally did from being inside the building. I silently cursed under my breath at the ruckus Bambi was making and started to undo the inside locks. Normally, we're supposed to secure the outer door of the airlock before opening the inner door, but I wanted to keep an escape route, so to say. I didn't have any plan for Bambi breaking out entirely, but I figured I would cross that bridge when I came to it. Once all the locks and the bolts were undone, I very, very slowly opened the door, which was just about as heavy as I thought it would be. My heart was pounding in my chest from both nerves and anticipation. This stupid deer that had been in the periphery of my mind for the past month would finally be before my eyes, and I was both excited and terrified. The moment I cracked open the entrance, though, the smell hit me before I could see anything. I was vaguely aware of it while outside the building, and slightly more so while in the airlock. But once I opened the door, it slammed into me like a big truck. It was the smell of rotten meat, decaying flesh, and all of the nastiness that comes with those things. The buzzing of flies filled the air, and I had to repress the urge to vomit from the stench. Did this deer even know how to finish her dinner? I heard the buzzing of flies, but no other sound from inside. No snorting, no growling, no stamping of hoofs, nothing. On one hand, I was relieved that I wasn't promptly being charged by an angry deer, but on the other hand, I began to worry that she might be getting ready to ambush me. Do deer even know how to ambush people? As I opened the door a bit more, the first thing I noticed were the eyes. The inside of the enclosure was pretty dark, with a few lights embedded in the ceiling, a number of them broken, being the only things that illuminated the place, since there were no windows. That being said, The two deep red orbs on the deer's face looked like they were glowing embers of fire and felt like they had the ferocity to match. The second thing I noticed was her mouth. It was stained red with what I assumed was blood. It looked as though it was continuously frothing, almost making me think of rabies. But we were supposed to put down any animals with rabies, so that couldn't be what this was. The third thing I noticed were the antlers. I knew that female reindeer could grow antlers, but this was no reindeer, not by far. In fact, given the general mass and size of the deer in question, I wasn't even sure she was any species of deer that I knew of. Have you ever heard of Samson the draft horse? He was over 7 feet tall and weighed a little over 1.5 tons. I'm pretty sure Bambi herself was at least a bit larger than Samson, with some extra muscle mass to boot. Everything about the deer screamed predator, from the rippling muscles to the massive hoofs, and I am fairly certain that one should never get the feeling of a predator from a deer in the first place. Bambi's antlers began to scratch along the roof as she started to make her way towards me, her legs having enough force behind them to literally shake the ground with each step she took. Oh God, she was making her way towards me. I tried to shut the door as fast as I could, but in my fascination with the creature I had ended up opening it way too far. So Bambi had enough time to charge her way over to the door and wedge it open with her antlers. At this point, I was cursing all of the curiosity I had ever had in my life, and my veins began to flood with adrenaline as I fought for what I knew might be my life. This thing would kill me if it got the chance, and probably would eat me, like whatever meat the manager had been feeding it thus far. I quickly realized that there was no way I was going to win a contest of strength with Bambi, especially not against her antlers, and stopped trying to get the door shut. Instead, I grabbed my key ring, put a few keys through the space between my fingers, like I learned in self-defense class, and stabbed at Bambi's neck. I knew that this refuge was here to help animals, to protect them, and rehabilitate them. But quite frankly, I'd rather kill an animal I'm supposed to be taking care of than let some gigantic mutant fuckhead deer have me for dinner. Well, all morality aside, it was still a pretty bad idea either way. The keys stabbed as far as they could into Bambi's neck. Maybe an inch at the most, but they didn't seem to do much except make her angry. A second after my mind had time to process how bad of a decision that was, Bambi reared up on her hind legs. How she did that in a building with such a low ceiling, I'm not so sure. She kicked forward, bashing the door open. The only reason I survived that strike was because the door itself, as strong as it was, took enough of the force that I was simply knocked flat on my ass. I was fairly certain, however, that I wasn't going to stay alive for much longer, given that Bambi was now staring down at me with those crimson eyes of hers that gleamed with violence and hunger in the glints of light that hit them. I assumed she was going to rear up again in order to stomp me into the ground like meat, but instead she started to lean down. I wasn't quite sure what she was doing for a few seconds until she opened her mouth. Let me say right now, deer are not supposed to have teeth like that, incisors as sharp as knives, about as long from front to back, and about as many as a shark is supposed to have, if not more, with serrated edges. I was fairly certain that Bambi could actually kill a shark if she tried. Viscera and gore were stuck between those monstrous teeth of hers, and as she got closer, I nearly passed out from the smell of all the raw meat on her breath, the temperature of which was almost hot enough to scald my skin. For a moment I said every prayer from every religion that I could remember, preparing myself for whatever afterlife I would soon be heading to. In the moment that I thought Bambi was going to chomp down on my head, though, she didn't. Instead, I heard a thwip sound come from behind me, and the deer whined in what I assumed was some sort of pain. The sound was still as deep as, if not deeper than, a lion's roar, and she retreated back inside of her enclosure. In the second after that, I thanked my lack of caution for not locking the outside door of the airlock, as the manager was standing there with the tranquilizer rifle I had seen with her before. The lady was angry, sure enough, and I assumed for a moment that she was just going to shoot me with the rifle next and throw me in there for Bambi to eat. Instead, she went to the door, locked it as tightly as she could, and helped me up. I told you to let me handle Bambi, didn't I? That she did. between the sheer shock of the situation and my good sense not to push her any further. I didn't really ask any questions about what was up with Bambi, why we were keeping her, or exactly what kind of meat she was eating. The lady didn't fire me or anything either, and I'm still planning on going to work next weekend, but I think I'll be staying away from Bambi's enclosure from now on. I'd rather not end up as the contents of some giant, flesh-eating deer's stomach. Story 2. The Mimicking Entity of the Minnesota Woods. Dan. I hear my wife's voice in my dreams most nights, but lately I've been hearing it when I wake up as well. My wife went missing about 4 years ago, and I am firmly convinced she is dead. No one could find her. Not the forest rangers, not the police, and not me. No one knows what happened to her. I'm convinced something killed her in these woods. I've made my home here for most of my life. My wife joined me shortly after we married. She was a more than capable hunter, so I figure whatever got her couldn't have been anything less than highly capable itself. I'm inclined to believe it was some sort of it, rather than a he or she. The woods of Minnesota are a lonely place during the winter. My wife was out on a morning hunt shortly before she went missing. It's a strange feeling when someone you love vanishes from your life like that. It is all at once infuriating and crushingly depressing. In my opinion, the lack of closure is what hurts the most. Now, I have nightmares about her, my mind creating a different horrific ending every single night I dream. The worst part of it all is waking to her voice. I always hear it at the end of my dreams, and then I hear it again upon waking. I know it isn't her, and I know something out there wants me to believe it is. Sitting up, I realize dawn is approaching. I was awoken at some point last night by the sound of screaming from the forest. I wasn't suicidal enough to go investigate something like that in the middle of a snowy night. Yet once the sun rises, I'm going to head out and check on another cabin not terribly far from here. My neighbor, if you can call her that, given the distance, lives there. Her name is Loretta, and she was there when my wife disappeared. I'll be damned if I don't at least investigate the screams I heard. I spent the rest of the darkness cleaning my guns and prepping them by candlelight. I prefer a simpler life, so I don't need electricity or any of that. I know this forest like the back of my hand, and as soon as daylight completely breaks, I head out into the snowy woods to investigate. It is a 3-mile hike east before I finally arrive at my destination. You can imagine this takes quite some time normally, but it takes twice as long in the deep snow. Upon my arrival, I begin pounding on the door. Loretta, you in there? I hear nothing. I give the door another heavy knock, but upon hearing only silence, I announce my intention in case she just didn't hear me and kick the door in. Don't shoot. I call out. It doesn't take long to get inside, but when I do, I fall back in shock. There's blood everywhere. It looks like a few shots were fired off, but there's no sign of a body. Judging by the sheer volume of blood, however, things do not look good. Fuck, I think to myself, what the hell could have happened here? Examining things more closely, it seems to me she was mauled by some sort of animal. The only problem, outside of my own forced entry, was that the cabin was locked tight, and it didn't look like anyone or anything had forced their way inside. I looked even closer and saw some shredded shirt cloth, along with a shotgun lying on the floor with a deep claw mark gouged into the wooden stock. Looking at the spray of blood, things looked worse and worse for Loretta. Why would she be missing if whatever attacked her hadn't already won the fight? I took a deep breath and looked for any sign of a trail. It appeared some blood led to the door, but after that all traces ended. I figured the snow was the likely culprit for the missing trail. It snows heavily and often at this time of year, and it wouldn't take any time at all for a blood trail to get covered up or otherwise vanish. I kicked myself at the thought that I should have tried to come last night. This was soon followed by the sobering realization that I could have been killed if I had come out here. A 3-mile hike in the middle of a blizzard in a dense forest just wasn't practical, even for someone who had spent most of their life out here. Pushing any further regret from my mind, I decided to look around outside. Examining the exterior of the cabin wasn't proving very useful, however, as the fresh snow had covered everything. There were no leads, only a missing body lost in a bloody brawl. I've seen some strange shit around here, but who or what could have gotten into a locked cabin without forcing the lock and then disappeared without a trace? I'm no detective, but we all lock our doors at night. I even go a step further and built a system that allows me to put a solid piece of welded metal behind my already locked door, just in case. It's simple, but it has never failed me. With no leads, I look out at the forest. The snow is falling more lightly than last night, but it's still coming down as I decide to head further east. Maybe I'll find something that will give me a clue further ahead. As I walk deeper into the forest, chewing on some homemade jerky and looking around to try and find anything that catches my eye, I see a set of eyes in the brush a few feet away. Slowly, I walk towards them, but as I get closer, they disappear. Probably just an animal, I think to myself, as I continue to walk. I laugh, wondering if being alone in the woods is finally getting to me a bit. If you live out here in solitude long enough, you'll start to hear things or see things that aren't really there. Sometimes your mind will make things much bigger than what they actually are. Shaking off any hesitation, I continue forward. Having put away the jerky I was eating, I head in the direction of where I saw the eyes, thinking there might be a future meal to be hunted. Although I could drive into town, which is many miles away, I might add, I generally find it better to just hunt for my own food. That's life out here. We've basically sworn off society. Stepping through the brush, I don't see any animal, but I do find some curious-looking tracks. Looking down, I see a footprint about 3 feet in length, featuring what appears to be a single massive toe. Looking through the trees, I follow the tracks until I begin to notice blood again. The blood appears to grow more prevalent the further I travel. Finally, I push my way through some thick bushes. On the other side of the bushes, I freeze in place, staring at a tree. I see what can only be Loretta. I identify her by what's left of her tattered clothing on her shredded corpse. What could have done this? I think to myself. Loretta was only 25, and as kind a soul as there could be. Examining what was left of her body, it is clear that whatever did this was brutal and extremely hungry. Most importantly, though, it wasn't human at all. I tried to think of what sort of animal could do this. What could even catch her out here in a manner like this? I am completely at a loss. The tracks, the state of the body, none of it makes any sense to me. I don't have long to ponder this, though, because suddenly a loud, piercing shriek echoes from somewhere in the forest. I am absolutely terrified. It is the most inhuman and unnerving sound I have ever heard in my life. I try to mentally slap myself to regain my senses, spinning around to head back to my cabin. I am miles away, and my body is shaking violently as I run. Hours later, just before dark, I finally arrive at my cabin. I was planning to drive into town, but to my shock, my truck has been completely destroyed. The hood is missing, smoke is rising from the engine bay, and the tires are utterly shredded. It is clear that whatever is out there doesn't want me to leave. Terrified, I run into my cabin, locking the door behind me and throwing the heavy bar lock into place. I try to take a moment to calm myself and breathe, but the panic is too much, and I end up vomiting onto the floor. I walk over to my bed, trying to process what is happening. I soon get up, pour some whiskey into a flask, and take a swig. I hold the flask shakily and breathe. I make sure a single swig is all I take, because I want something to calm my nerves, not make myself unaware of my surroundings. After I calm down a bit, I try to think about what could have killed Loretta, and how the hell I'm going to get out of these woods safely. It is evident that whatever is out there could have probably killed me already, since it somehow got ahead of me and disabled my only way of getting anywhere. And the manner in which Loretta was torn to shreds. Despair hits me at the sudden thought that the same thing that killed Loretta could have killed my wife. I try not to think further on this as I refocus my mind on what I should do next. I keep my gun close, light a fire in the fireplace, and sit there shaking until I finally drift off. Another nightmare takes hold. This one is of my wife being torn to shreds. I feel entirely hopeless as I watch her being ripped apart, screaming in agony. Then, just like that, I hear her voice. She's screaming for me to help her, but I can do nothing. I awake to that exact same voice coming from somewhere outside. I regain my wits long enough to realize where I am. There is no way in hell I'm going to answer that call. But at the same time, I feel my soul being crushed at the sound of her voice. Is that what this thing wants? Is it trying to torment me? I cry myself to sleep again. Upon waking, I realize it's daytime. I debate going outside, but upon opening the door, I notice there is a massive blizzard raging. Snow and ice, the likes of which I have never seen before, are pouring down in droves as the wind screams at me. I force the door shut again, relocking and barring it. Sitting down, I make some breakfast. It's clear I'm not going anywhere today. I think to myself, I think over everything, and try to get some more sleep. For the remainder of the day, I just try to shut my eyes, but every time I do, I hear my wife scream. I ultimately wind up drinking myself to sleep. When I wake up, it is night, and the storm appears to have died down a bit. I'm about to get up when I see the doorknob slowly turning. To my absolute shock, the door is unlocked. Did I do that? No, there is no way. If I hadn't also engaged the heavy bar lock behind it, whatever is out there would have been inside by now. Dread hits me like a physical blow as I rush over and relock the door. Immediately, I hear a ferocious pounding on the wood, a violent, heavy banging that lasts for 3 or more knocks before everything falls completely quiet again. I am trapped alone and with no way to contact anyone. We don't exactly have cell phones or service towers this deep into the woods. Thinking about that, I let out a bitter laugh. Perhaps I should have embraced some aspects of society, I think. If I survive this, I surely will. I think to myself again, yes, if I survive. I laugh aloud, and as I do, I realize that a bit of insanity seems to be taking root in my mind. No, I need to stop drinking and keep my wits about me. I start up another fire and do some cooking. Deer meat has never tasted so good. Food itself has never tasted so good. Being alive is something I realize I took for granted. But as I'm eating, the delicious smell of the cooked meat is suddenly overpowered. Something far more nauseating catches my nose. I smell decay and rotting meat so powerful that I feel dizzy. Help me, Dan. My wife's voice seems to sing from outside, almost as though the wind itself were speaking in her voice. I feel dizzy and sick from both the stench and the heartbreaking sound of my wife's voice. Leave me the fuck alone. Why do you torment me? I scream. There is silence for a moment. I reach for my gun, praying and shaking, when suddenly I hear the sound of glass shattering and a heavy thud. Loretta's decaying, mutilated body is now lying on the floor right next to me. Terrified, I fire off a few shots out the broken window into the night, but my gunfire is met only by a terror-inducing shriek, and the storm outside picks up with renewed fury. My fire dies. I sit there for hours, shaking, cold, and terrified, with my gun aimed squarely at the broken window. The rest of the night is just falling snow, no more tormenting shrieks, howls, or voices of my wife. As daylight approaches, I realize I haven't blinked for what seems like hours. I spend much of the day barricading the area with the broken window and fortifying every other weak spot in the cabin. Soon after this, I drag Loretta's body outside and bury her. I figure I can tell the police everything if I survive, but then again, I probably won't, and it's highly doubtful they'd believe a single word I have to say anyway. Not long after burying Loretta, I realize the sun is setting and I haven't eaten. I head inside, locking and barring my door, adding a few other reinforcements and 2 extra makeshift bar locks. I don't want to let anything through that door. As I cook up a meal, it doesn't take long before the stench of decay reaches my nose again. I know what it is at this point. It is the smell of the thing that taunts me. It is waiting outside while I sit in here, trying to eat through the stench and cowering like a baby. The truth is, I wanted to go out and attack it, but I hadn't even seen it yet. I did not know what I was getting into. Judging by what it did to Loretta and the other things I'd seen thus far, a direct approach wouldn't be wise. I needed to know more about it. 2 things, however, were absolutely clear. It was highly intelligent, and it was vicious. Struggling to stomach the rest of my meal, I finish it and eventually collapse into a deep sleep at some unknown hour of the night. Waking up the next day, I realize the storm is raging stronger than ever before. Something doesn't seem right about it. It is the dead of winter, and it snows quite a bit. But the way this storm is raging makes it feel as though something is actively controlling it. I try not to think about it and eat some more, trying to ration what I have left. I'm beginning to see my food stock dwindling. The thought crosses my mind that perhaps the thing is purposely keeping me trapped here to starve me to death. I laugh for a moment, but the laughter ceases when I hear another heavy bang at the door. Leaping up, I head for the door slowly, gun in hand. Looking through the peephole, however, I see nothing. Did I actually hear that sound? I had to. It was way too loud. I am growing exhausted and weary from the relentless psychological torment. Thoughts run through my head about possibly making a suicidal run for it. They are immediately shot down by the ever-dwindling, logical, rational part of my brain, reminding me that suicide is not the answer. I need to keep my wits about me. If I go out, it has to be only in the most desperate of situations. Day blends into night, and night blends into day. Eventually, I begin to lose all sense of time. Every little noise makes me jump, and every sound makes me shake. I'm beginning to lose my mind in tandem with my dwindling food supply. I begin to equate the loss of food with the loss of my sanity. Some nights are quiet, others are much louder. The storm rages on, and it is becoming increasingly apparent that this is not a natural storm. Some nights I hear a slow clawing at the doorway or shrieks echoing from the forest. I consistently hear my wife's voice asking for help at least once every night. I know the thing has to know that I know better. I believe it knows that I know it isn't my wife, and yet it continues to do so, no doubt as a psychological weapon to wear me down mentally. When daylight comes, I find myself going out only long enough to shovel snow from around my cabin, so I'm not buried alive. It is extremely cold and I am half delirious. I am almost completely out of food now. I thought I heard a voice just now, but that would be crazy, right? Finishing the shoveling, I shut, lock, and bar the door again. I take no more than 2 steps before hearing a knock again. Looking through the peephole, I see nothing. Stepping away, I hear the knocking again. This time I hear a voice, and it sounds like a man, but I'm not sure. Opening the door, I see nothing but a wall of white snow. There is no one there. I find myself wanting to tear my hair out from the grief and desperation inside me. The desperation is making me grow deeply uneasy, and I am beginning to see things that aren't there. Hours later, night sets in and the storm picks up again. I find myself nibbling on the last of my food as I hear my wife's voice begging for help again. She's crying, and I'm crying too. I don't know what is real anymore. I'm becoming less and less able to decipher reality from insanity. I have noticed that the harassing noises are becoming less frequent over the next day or two. It has been completely quiet, but I'm far too weak to make it anywhere at this point. I'm starving. Every single time I stand up, I feel sick and dizzy. My legs shake and I'm incredibly weary. Is this it? Is this the end? Suddenly, a loud pounding rings out at the door. I slowly, weakly walk towards it. I look through the peephole, and to my absolute shock and horror, I see a rib cage. But inside the rib cage, what looks like my wife's face. No, that's fucking impossible. I collapse to the floor. Before long, I feel the world spinning, things grow dark. And then, in what feels like the blink of an eye, I find myself lying there, listening to a scratching noise outside. Just come in and kill me, I think. Just finish me the fuck off. Please, just do it. I feel the most desperate I've ever felt in my life. Before I know it, I am contemplating the thought of going out into the woods and walking until I collapse and freeze to death. Yes, this seems like the only way to just end it all. Delirious, I unbar the door, unlock it, and swing it open. To my shock, I see the body of the beast standing right before me. It is huge, emaciated, and smells like death. It has a deer skull for a head, large hollow eyes, and is dripping with fresh blood. In pure shock at the sight of the creature, I pull my gun, threatening to fire. I guess I care more about my life than I realized. It was mostly a primal reaction when I pulled the trigger, but upon firing, the world seems to snap back to reality. Was I sleeping? Was I dreaming? The harsh reality of my situation unfolds before my eyes. Standing before me, with a spray of bullet holes in his chest, was a man. I believe he was trying to ask, why, as he collapsed to the floor. Panicked and desperate, I dragged him inside, locked the door, and barred it again. No, 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 no. No, this isn't fucking happening. This isn't happening. What was I even doing? Had I just killed an innocent man in my sleep? Was I really that hungry, terrified, and mad? No, I thought to myself, this can't be real. This can't be happening. The thought crossed my mind for a moment that I would need to hide the body in case anyone came looking for him. But that thought lasted only a moment before another, much darker thought crossed my mind. Something so sick and disgusting that I hesitated at first. I found myself backing into a corner, away from the body. I was out of food, I was running out of time, and I needed to eat. A war ignited inside my head. My mind was debating what to do, while my stomach and body told me exactly what I needed to do in order to survive. My mind, or what was left of it, said one thing, but my body said another. If I ate some of this man, even just a little, it might be what I needed to survive. Given enough time with proper storage and handling, I could regain my strength. Yes, I could live. Another voice inside me was telling me no, that it wasn't right. But my body and some animalistic part of my mind were rationalizing it all. We were in a desperate situation. You need to eat to survive. If you regain your strength, perhaps you can get out of this place. I'm sure the police would understand, right? I felt the no disappearing from my mind, and the yes seemed far more appealing to most of my brain and all of my body. Slowly forcing myself up, I found myself holding some tools, a saw and some other cutlery. The remainder of my night was filled with the sound of my wife asking for help outside, accompanying the sound of me cutting this innocent man's body up. I need to survive, I thought with a gleeful smile as I carved up the man's meat and prepped him. That's what this was all about. It was survival. Yes, survival. Much of the rest of the night was a blur of blood, cleaning, cutting, and storing. We are just animals, after all. Eating another human is just eating an intelligent animal. If it's for survival purposes, it's okay. I told myself this over and over again. Eventually, I finished up all the prep, stored the meat, and cooked a part of him. It was a part of his leg. I tried not to think about it as I bit into the charred meat of the dead man. To my surprise, I liked it. I found it delicious. I didn't debate whether that was because it actually tasted great or because I was just happy to finally eat. Looking in the cabinet, I pulled out some seasoning and found it made it much more delicious. A little hot sauce never hurt any meat, either. I felt my stomach thanking me as I bit into the charred flesh. I didn't eat much, as I hadn't eaten in a long time and didn't want to vomit my meal up by overindulging. I stored the rest and rested. I heard the snow, I heard the cries. None of it mattered for a moment as I passed out. In my dreams, I saw my wife. In those dreams, I saw her die. The difference this time was that I saw it from the monster's perspective. It was the strangest thing. I swear, I could taste my wife as the monster fed upon her. The dream seemed to have no end. I saw it again and again. I could no longer decipher the difference between the monster and myself. I hadn't eaten my wife in reality, obviously, but I had eaten someone to survive. In some ways, I immediately felt sorry for this creature, because no matter how much it ate, it only grew hungrier. I awoke from the nightmare angry and insatiably hungry. I immediately pulled out more meat and cooked it before digging in. I no longer knew if it was day or night. I didn't hear banging, nor did I hear shrieks or the voice of my wife. I needed to eat. That was all that mattered. As I felt hot and hungry, I ate, but upon finishing the food, hunger consumed me again. I cooked and ate some more. Eventually, I grew tired and passed out from all the food I had consumed. I found myself hungry in what felt like another dream. I saw myself through the eyes of the creature eating viciously. What little sanity I had left was vanishing from within. I wanted to taste the flesh of more humans. Yes, I thought, more humans will sate my hunger pains. I probably need to hunt some more if I hope to live. I woke to find I was holding pieces of raw meat from the man I'd murdered. Cold chunks of meat were between my teeth. So good, I thought. I'm going to need to hunt more. Yes, I unbarred the door and unlocked it, only to be surprised to find a solid wall of snow and ice upon opening it. I tried breaking through some of it, but nothing worked. How long have I been here? I thought. The reality of the fact that I was trapped and stuck was setting in. I couldn't break through, and I think I lost my mind even more because of that. The reality of being trapped was shoved out of my mind by the immediate need to eat again. I didn't wait to cook. No, that took way too long. I lost all track of time, and I don't know how long I fed, but eventually I ran out of meat. There was no longer a fire going. I couldn't make another, as the snow would cover the chimney and cause it to implode. I was cold, alone, and worst of all, I was starving. I felt desperation setting in. Hours seemed like seconds to me, and seconds seemed like hours to my hunger. I looked at my own arm and thought to myself, I could lose that. Yeah, that'd be okay. Anything to feed again. I thought about cutting off my arm, but instead, I decided, why waste the time to cook my own flesh? I'll admit, it hurt at first. Tasting my own blood was somewhat pleasant, though as I also tasted the raw meat of my own flesh. I ignored the hair and the skin, and worked my way slowly down to what I believe was the bone at one point, before feeling weak, probably from blood loss. The world was cold now. It was pleasant, though. And soon, I felt everything going black. I drifted off, as I did. Police and park authorities ask anyone with information on his whereabouts to please report the information to local authorities immediately. Story 3. I consider myself to be an avid kayaker. I love spending time on the water where it's quiet, peaceful, and relaxing. There's nothing like spending your day out on blue-green waters, soaking up the sun without a care in the world. Sadly, up here in North Dakota, there aren't very many options for open water recreation. Typically, people either head towards the Missouri River or to one of the more popular lakes in the state. Most of those places are packed with people since there isn't a lot to choose from. Now, if you're a passionate kayaker like I am, you'll know where the quiet spots are. There are a few hidden gems throughout the state that not many people know about, because I don't want anyone ever going there. I'm going to call my ex-favorite spot Emerald Lake instead of its actual name. I used to call it a hidden gem for a reason. This lake is gorgeous. Its water is unbelievably murky, which sounds like the opposite of gorgeous, but it gives off this pretty emerald green color, and it perfectly reflects the sky and surrounding trees. The lake is surrounded by woods. It may not sound exciting to you, but in North Dakota, you're lucky to see any trees at all. If you do, they were most likely planted by someone. These trees crown the edge of the lake, giving it a cozy feeling. You really feel like it's just you and the lake. Emerald Lake is maybe 1,000 feet wide and about 3 miles long. Upon first glance, the lake looks to be nothing more than a pond, but if you get towards the back, you'll find a hidden bend that takes you further along, winding in and out of tree-studded hills. In order to get to the lake, you need to travel way back into the countryside on a maze of gravel roads, perfect for keeping this place a secret. On one of my days off earlier this summer, I decided to take a kayaking trip out to my precious lake. I asked my best friend to come along with me because I knew we'd be the only ones there. During the weekends, you might run into 1 or 2 other people, but since I have days off during the work week, I knew we'd be out there all alone, perfect for catching up on gossip with your bestie. We loaded our things and set out for a fun day. We arrived at the lake at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and as expected, there wasn't another soul in sight. Since there's only one way into the lake, and there were no other vehicles, we were in the clear. You'd need to trespass onto private state land and chop down a few trees to get onto the lake in any other way. I drove down to the water's edge, and we both hopped out to unload our things. I crawled into the bed of my truck, unstrapped the kayaks, and prepared the paddles. I started to shift the kayaks so that I could get them out more easily. We quickly set up our gear, and I parked my truck away from the water, in the rare case that someone else came along to enjoy the lake. Right before we launched, my friend stopped what she was doing and turned to face me with a quizzical expression landing on her face. "Did you say something?" my friend questioned. After a few moments of me giving her one of those "are you nuts" types of looks, she whispered, "I swear I just heard someone. I mean, it sounded like a guy, but obviously you're not a man, so it confused me." I laughed and told her that she was hearing things. She grinned and shrugged it off. So, we set off on our journey, enjoying each other's company while discussing the good old days of playing Skyrim for hours on end. We laughed at inside jokes, had a few snacks, drank a few brews, and discussed trivial things. We listened to the birds chirp, watched swallows dive at the bugs around us, and giggled at some very vocal ducks who didn't like being disturbed. At one point, I paddled over to a couple of mallards to try and snap a pic, as it's pretty difficult to photograph grumpy waterfowl. Satisfied by what I had captured, I caught up with my friend who had floated ahead. "Did you hear that weird call?" she asked when I caught up to her. I replied that I hadn't heard anything but a couple of angry ducks. "Oh." She looked a bit confused. "I swear I actually heard something this time. It sounded like a really low, almost gravelly moo. It almost sounded like the thing was in pain. I don't know how else to explain it, other than the fact that the sound unnerved me." I gave her a puzzled look. I didn't think there were any cattle in this area. I paused for a bit. Maybe one member of a herd wandered off from somewhere nearby and got hurt, but I think the nearest ranch would be Price's farm about 25 miles back. We both sat in silence for a moment and then decided to continue on. Neither of us thought much else about it. About an hour into the trip, we reached the end of the lake, or at least what most people assume is the end. We came upon the first of many bends, knowing that we wouldn't be able to tell if anyone else arrived in the area, which was fine. I glanced over to a cluster of pretty aspen trees and saw a large hawk of some sort sitting at the top of one. Spotting a photo op, I turned to my friend and asked if she wanted to paddle to the other side of the area we were in to check out the lake. Being a less experienced kayaker, she shook her head and told me to just head over there. She and I both knew that it would take twice as long if she joined me. I wouldn't have minded, but she didn't want to put in all the extra time and effort. I suggested she just keep heading straight while I checked out the hawk, and I would just meet up with her shortly. She agreed. I began to paddle over to the lovely aspens and the majestic hawk, excited about the neat pictures I'd be getting. The closer I got, the more I began to notice the dead trees. It saddened me to see the trees I always loved dead and decaying. The situation was sort of odd, though. Why would this entire grove of aspens be dying off? There hadn't been any flooding in several years, and we weren't in a drought currently. So how were they dying? I neared the tree with the hawk cautiously. Before I could even snap a pic, the beautiful birds soundlessly took flight and disappeared into the woods. Now by myself, I began to feel a creeping sensation. My skin began to crawl, as if tiny little fingers were tapping every inch of my body. The hair stood up on my arms, and I got that empty feeling in my stomach you get when you know you're completely alone. It dawned on me that I hadn't spotted any other wildlife in a while. No swallows swooping in and out, no irritated ducks, not even an occasional chirp of a songbird. Nothing. It was dead silent at Emerald Lake. Even for an area known for its peace and quiet, this moment felt too dead. Chilled to the core and disappointed about missing a nice picture, I switched directions and decided to head back to my friend. Out of the corner of my eye, I could have sworn I saw a white aspen move. But that's idiotic. Trees don't move. My brain was just trying to scare me. I ignored it and began to paddle toward my friend. I could still see her on the other side of the water and up a bit further, but she wasn't moving. She was completely still, not paddling at all. Her face was turned away from me, and she was staring intently at something in the trees, but I couldn't tell what it was. Fearing the worst, I started to power paddle to where she was. It would only take me a few minutes to get to her. Once I was about 10 feet away, she must have heard me splashing the paddle in the water and turned to me. Her face was as white as a sheet, and her eyes showed signs of sheer distress. She waved me over without a word. My eyes followed the direction she was looking. Staring out from among another set of crowded, dead trees was a dirty, cream-colored tent. Now, I know what you must be thinking. So what? It's a lake. People like to camp next to lakes all the time. But I must remind you, the areas surrounding the lake are technically private state land and not open to the public. Only the lake itself was. You'd have to hike through miles of private property to get here. The tent was ominously perched right on the edge of the water, where it threatened to be consumed by the lake. It seemed abandoned. No one was around, and the site looked like someone had left in a panic and never bothered to come back. Trash and miscellaneous camping supplies littered the area surrounding the tent. The little one-man tent was covered in dark stains, with one side completely ripped open. I was too bothered by the sight of it to get any closer. Someone had definitely left in a hurry. Chills were running up and down my spine at that point. My friend turned back to me and asked, "I thought you said you weren't really supposed to be on the land surrounding the lake?" "You're not," I reinforced. I gave her a hesitant shrug and suggested, "Maybe whoever it was just didn't realize that you weren't allowed to camp out here." Of course, I didn't really believe that. I worked at a state park for a while, and you get all sorts of people. The ones who break the rules usually know what they're doing. A lot of vagrants tend to camp out in places where no one else is around, even if it's not allowed. Maybe whoever was out here knew they weren't supposed to be here and got chased off by game and fish or something. They left in a hurry and forgot their tent, she suggested. Maybe, I mumbled back to her. But I couldn't help but wonder, why would game and fish, or any other authority for that matter, just let an abandoned tent sit out in the open and wither away? I decided to change the subject. "So, do you want to keep going, or should we head back to shore and find some place to eat?" A look of relief passed over my friend's face. "I'm starving, let's head back." I nodded in agreement. We both quickly switched directions and began to paddle away from the lone tent. We didn't get very far, though, before finally realizing that my friend hadn't been hearing things this whole trip. It started off just as she had described to me, although I didn't really understand what she had meant until now. It began as a weird, wet, gurgling sound and grew into a deep, rumbling groan. I don't know what else to call it, but I see why she said it sounded like a moo. Whatever was making the sound was animalistic. It was a low pitch, coming from the trees only about 20 feet away from us. Whatever it was, it did sound like it was in pain. But what sort of creature could make a sound like that? My throat was choking on my breath, and my heart was beating rapidly. I couldn't swallow down my fear. I knew that whatever was making the noise had to be just to the right of us. Despite what my brain was screaming at me, I decided to turn my head and search the shoreline for whatever was making the noise. I wish I hadn't. Peeking out from behind one of the dying aspens was a creature with the palest skin I've ever seen. The thing was so white, it seemed to be using the white bark of the aspens to blend in. It was sort of hunched over, with only part of its body visible behind the tree trunk. The creature was human-like in its limbs, I suppose. It had 2 legs and 2 arms, but it was nothing but skin and bone. It was entirely hairless. From what I could tell, a long, ovular face peered out at us. It had no eyes, no mouth, just horrifying dark indentations where they should have been. Imagine the famous painting, The Scream, but instead of a screaming mouth, there was just an elongated, empty divot. My eyes began to water. I had been staring at this thing for God knows how long. I heard my friend whimper my name. She saw it too. Without moving my head, I squeaked at her. "Paddle. Paddle as quickly as possible back to shore." Our arms burned with the intensity of our movements. But we couldn't stop now. We could hear a rustling coming from the trees, keeping perfect pace with us. We were only about 100 feet from the shore, and the trees were beginning to thin out near the boat landing. Suddenly, a little ways behind me, I heard a massive splash. There was only one thing that could have made that. North Dakota carp aren't that big. Faster, I screamed to my frightened friend. We were already paddling with everything we had, but I didn't know if this thing could swim or not. We finally hit the shallow water at the shore, and the two of us practically dove out of our kayaks. "I have to get the truck," I yelled. I don't know why I was screaming when she was right next to me, but the adrenaline and fear were completely taking over. I sprinted to the truck, fumbling around in my bag for the keys. When I finally found them, they slipped through my fingers and clattered out onto the gravel ground, just like one of those damn fools you see in horror movies. I hurriedly snatched them back up, unlocked the door, and flung myself into the driver's seat. Rocks went flying as I hauled ass over to where my friend and the kayaks were. She was shaking violently. "Any sign of it?" I hollered. She shook her head. "I haven't seen anything. I don't know whether I should have been relieved or not. Hurry and throw the kayaks into the back. Don't worry about strapping anything down." She did as I said. Together we lifted and tossed both kayaks and their paddles into the bed of the truck. I nearly slipped on the loose gravel as I ran back to get into the driver's seat. Then, I heard it again. I looked behind me to see its pale head breaking the water's surface, those empty facial sockets staring directly at me. It was only about 15 feet from the shoreline. I ripped open the driver's door, and before both of our doors could even slam shut, we were speeding away. I didn't dare stop to check if we'd left anything behind. But I swear, when I glanced in the rearview mirror as we tore down the gravel road, I saw a tall white figure standing on the shoreline right where we had been moments before. It's only been a week since our time at Emerald Lake, and I still have no idea what we saw that day. A day I will never forget,